Hey there, I'm Ethan, 24, born and raised in a small Indiana town. A few months ago, I moved to a quiet suburb for a fresh start. Life back home was complicated. I'm a mechanic at a local shop, not glamorous, but I love fixing things. There's something honest about it. You see what's broken, get your hands dirty, and make it right. When I first arrived, I didn't know anyone. Most nights, it was just me in my modest rental house, eating frozen pizza, listening to cars pass by. I wasn't looking for anything, figuring life would rebuild itself slowly, like an old engine. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. It was a Saturday afternoon, the sun beating down, the air thick and humid from a morning shower. I was walking home from the hardware store, carrying a bag of tools for a side project, when I saw her, 2 houses down, a woman kneeling by a flower bed, wrestling a leaky garden hose, water sprayed everywhere, soaking her jeans and t-shirt, but she fought on, determined. I might have kept walking to avoid seeming like a creepy neighbor, but something about her made me pause. She didn't just look frustrated with the hose. There was a heaviness, like she carried the weight of the world. "Need help?" I called, holding up my tool bag as an offering. She looked up slightly startled, her deep blue eyes meeting mine. For a moment, she stared, as if deciding whether to trust me or tell me to go. Then she nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said softly, her voice faint, almost sleepy. "That'd be great." I crossed the yard, knelt beside her, and fixed the leak with a quick repair, tightened the connector, stopped the water. "Simple fix," I said, handing her the hose. She gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "No problem," I replied, wiping my hands on my jeans. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Just moved in down the street." She hesitated, then said, "Samantha." We stood there awkwardly for a second. She fidgeted with the hose, unsure whether to say more or retreat inside. I glanced over my shoulder, acting casual. "If you ever need anything fixed around here, I'm pretty handy. Just holler." Samantha nodded, but I could tell she wasn't one to ask for help easily. She seemed proud, yet deeply wounded. As I turned to leave, I noticed a glint on her left hand, a wedding ring. My chest tightened slightly. I didn't know her story, but it didn't take a genius to sense something was off. No man was around, and her eyes held pain, her presence half absent, like part of her was elsewhere. I didn't pry, it wasn't my place. As I walked home, I glanced back once. She stood there, hose limp in her hands, watching me go. Then she smiled, small, almost shy, but real. That night, on my back patio with a cold beer, crickets chirping, I couldn't stop thinking about that smile. It spoke of loneliness, of how life might unexpectedly connect 2 broken people. I didn't realize it then, but that moment cracked open a door to something new. The next few days were quiet. I saw Samantha from a distance a few times, tending her garden, pulling weeds, carrying groceries. We didn't talk. You could feel the grief around her, the kind that doesn't welcome company. Still, something pulled me every time I passed her house. Maybe the way she moved, like she carried invisible chains, or that small smile haunting me more than I'd admit. One evening, just before dusk, I saw her struggling again, trying to fix a rotted front porch step. It looked dangerous, like it could collapse under her. She crouched, hammer in hand, frustrated and overwhelmed. I hesitated for half a second, then crossed the street. "Hey," I called. "You're going to hurt yourself doing that." She looked up, brushing hair from her face with the back of her hand. "It's fine," she said instinctively, but it wasn't. "Let me help," I said, setting down my tool bag before she could protest. Honestly, 2 hands are better than 1. This time she didn't argue, just stepped aside and sat on the top step, knees to her chest, watching me work in silence. The fix was simple, A few boards, some nails, but I felt her heavy, mournful gaze the whole time. "You do this for a living?" she asked softly. "Kinda," I said, smiling slightly. "Mechanic. Grew up fixing anything that needed it. Guess it stuck." She nodded, pulling her sleeve over her hand like she was cold, though it was still warm out. When I finished, I stood, wiping sweat from my forehead. "There, good as new. Should hold you for a while?" I thought that was it. Another small exchange, a polite thank you, another lonely walk home. But then she surprised me. "Want some lemonade?" she asked hesitantly. "I just made some." I smiled. "Sure, sounds great." Inside, her house felt colder, the silence thicker, not just from lack of sound, but from an absence of life, like the house itself held its breath. The living room was neat, but small details told a story. A folded American flag in a glass case on the mantel, a wedding photo of Samantha with a man in uniform, both young, radiant, his arm tight around her shoulders. She caught me looking. "That's my husband," she said, setting 2 glasses on the coffee table, her voice catching on the last syllable. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." She nodded, looking at her hands. "Car accident. 6 weeks ago." I didn't know what to say. Nothing felt enough. Instead of fumbling for words, I sat across from her, sipped the lemonade. It was tangy, a bit too sweet, and it made my chest ache. We sat in silence for a while, just being there. Samantha gave a faint, bitter chuckle. "Sorry, I'm not great company right now." "You're fine," I said. "You don't have to be anything." She looked at me, unsure whether to trust my words. "Everyone keeps saying it's time to move on," she said, "like grief has a schedule." "It doesn't," I said without thinking. "Some things stay with you forever. You just learn to carry them." She stared at me a long time, and for a moment I thought she'd cry. She didn't, just nodded faintly. I finished my lemonade, stood, not wanting to overstay. "If you need anything, just knock," I repeated. She walked me to the door. As I stepped out, she said softly, "Thank you, Ethan." I turned, smiled. "Any time, Samantha." The door clicked shut, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. That night, lying in bed, I kept picturing her, small, fragile, yet fighting every day to keep going. I hadn't planned anything, didn't want to push or fix her, didn't want to replace anyone, but I knew I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. Something had shifted between that broken porch step and the silence in her living room. For the first time since moving here, I didn't feel alone. Then came the storm, a sudden Midwest thunderstorm, heavy, loud, angry, the sky an eerie green, the air electric. I was at my window watching rain hit the glass when I saw it, Samantha's garage door flapping wildly in the wind, barely on its hinges. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket, ran across the street, boots splashing in puddles. I pounded on her door. "Samantha!" I shouted over the wind. "Your garage!" The door flew open. She stood there barefoot, in jeans and a worn sweater, hair damp and clinging to her face. "I know," she yelled back, trying to be heard. "I couldn't get it closed." "Stay inside," I said, waving her back. "I'll handle it." Before she could argue, I ran to the garage. The wind fought me, tugging the door like it wanted to tear it off. I wrestled it shut, jammed a piece of wood into the frame to hold it. It wasn't pretty, but it'd last the storm, soaked, water dripping from my hair and clothes. I returned to her porch. Samantha stood there with a towel, her expression a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "You're crazy," she said, laughing slightly. "Yeah," I shivered. "You're welcome." She stepped aside to let me in, and I didn't argue. The storm grew louder, thunder rattling the windows, lights flickering before settling into a dim glow. "Here," she said, handing me the towel. "Come sit by the heater." I kicked off my boots, trailing water, and followed her to the living room. She vanished to the back, returned with a sweater and sweatpants. They might be a bit big, she said, handing them over, but at least they're dry. I didn't protest, changed in the bathroom. The clothes smelled like her, clean, faintly lavender. Back in the living room, Samantha sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, knees to her chest, looking small, vulnerable. I took the armchair across from her, unsure what to say or do. For a few minutes, we just listened to the storm, rain pounding the roof, thunder shaking the house. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm too young to be a widow. She wasn't looking at me, just staring out the window, rain blurring the world outside. I stayed silent, listening. She pulled the blanket tighter. Everyone thinks I'm strong, she said, almost to herself. They say, you'll find someone else, or you're young, you'll move on. Like it's that easy, like it didn't matter. I felt the weight of her words, their rawness. I don't want to move on, she said, but I can't live in this emptiness either. I leaned forward, careful not to startle her. She finally looked at me, really looked, her eyes glistening but tearless. Not yet, she whispered, so softly I almost missed it. Stay with me tonight. It wasn't desperate or pleading, just human, raw, real, not about anything physical, not something she wasn't ready for, but about not being alone. I nodded. Okay, I said, voice steady. I'll stay. She smiled, a small, broken thing that hurt my chest more than anything. I moved to the couch, sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned into me, like she wasn't sure I'd stay. I didn't pull away, didn't pull. I put my arm around her shoulders and she rested her head on my chest. We stayed like that a long time, the storm raging outside. No words, no promises. Just a quiet understanding between two broken people holding each other together. I felt her breathing slow, her body relax bit by bit. For the first time since I moved here, maybe for both of us, the world didn't feel so cruel. Just two people in a storm, finding shelter in each other. Samantha's living room felt warm, quiet despite the storm. She hadn't moved, her head on my chest, her breathing shallow at first, then deeper, steadier. I didn't dare move either, not for comfort, but because I was exactly where I needed to be. Minutes blurred into hours. Samantha barely stirred when thunder shook the walls. I tightened my arm around her each time, instinctively, protectively, as if I could shield her from what she carried inside. At some point, the power went out, lamps flickering and dying, leaving only the fireplace's soft glow and distant lightning flashes. I didn't mind. It felt right. Her breathing grew heavier, not fear, but exhaustion. She needed this. I needed someone to lean on, even for a night. I stayed awake, listening to the storm, watching lightning dance across the room. Every so often, Samantha gripped me tighter in her sleep, small, fragile, like she might break if not handled gently. But beneath it was strength, a quiet resolve not to let life crush her completely. I don't know how long we sat there. Maybe all night, maybe a few hours. Time didn't matter. Around sunrise the storm faded, thunder softening to a distant murmur, rain easing to a steady drip. Samantha stirred, blinking awake. For a moment she looked confused, like she'd forgotten where she was or why she wasn't alone. Then she glanced up at me, hair messy, face puffy from sleep, and something shifted in her eyes. Embarrassment, maybe shame. She sat up quickly, pulling the blanket around her. I'm sorry, she said, voice raspy from sleep and something deeper. I didn't mean to... Don't, I said gently. She looked at me, startled. You don't need to apologize, I said. Not for needing someone. She stared for a long moment, as if testing whether it was safe to believe me. Her lips quivered, and she turned away, wiping her eyes with her sweatshirt sleeve. I'm not good at this, she said, almost laughing through it. I'm not used to needing someone. Yeah, I said softly. Me neither. She gave a faint, real smile. I'm going to make coffee, she said, standing, blanket draped like a cape. Want some? I'd kill for some, I joked. She laughed, soft, breathy, genuine. I watched her pad to the kitchen, barefoot, blanket trailing. She moved carefully, like her body was relearning how to live. I sat on the couch, feeling something shift inside me. Not pity or obligation, but something quieter, stronger. Respect, admiration, care. She returned with 2 mugs as the sky turned pale grey, dawn breaking. She handed me a cup, sat across from me, knees tucked under the blanket. We sipped in silence for a few minutes, not awkward, but comfortable, like the quiet you share when words aren't needed. Then she spoke. You don't have to stay, she said calmly. You probably have stuff to do. I shook my head. Nothing's more important than this. She smiled faintly, looking at her mug. You're dangerous, she said softly. I raised an eyebrow. Dangerous for someone like me, she explained. Someone just learning to stand again. I set my coffee down, leaned forward. I'm not here to knock you down, Samantha, I said. I'm here to help you up if you'll let me. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't wipe the tears this time, just let them fall silently. When she set her coffee down and reached for my hand, it felt sacred. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but I held them gently, letting her set the pace. We sat there, hand in hand, as the world woke up outside. The weeks that followed felt different. At first it was subtle, Samantha waving from her porch when I got home from work, or coming over to ask if I needed help with my truck. Small gestures, tiny cracks in the wall she'd built around herself. I didn't push or chase, just stayed present, a safe place for her to lean into when she wanted. Some days she was quiet, lost in thought. Others, her smile came easily, her voice soft, melodic, like she was learning to breathe again. And we spent more time together, coffee on her porch, talking about everything and nothing. She shared about her husband, James, how they met in college, built a life here, how it ended so fast. There was no anger in her voice, just grief and something new. Acceptance. One Saturday, we drove to a small park outside town. Samantha packed a picnic, and we spread a blanket by the lake. It was a beautiful day, bright sun, gentle breeze untouched by the world's chaos. We sat for hours, watching ducks glide across the water, talking about the future in a vague, half-joking way, too scared to be serious. At some point she grew quiet. I looked over. She was staring at the lake, her face serious. Without a word she reached up, slid her wedding ring off her finger. She held it, turning it slowly, sunlight catching the gold, making it gleam. I'll always love him, she said softly. He'll always be part of me. I stayed silent, knowing she wasn't done. But there's still a lot of life left, she continued, voice trembling slightly, and I think he'd want me to live it. She closed her hand around the ring, held it to her chest for a moment, then tucked it carefully into her bag's small pocket and zipped it shut. When she looked at me, tears in her eyes, there was something brighter too. Hope. She smiled, a real beautiful smile that warmed my chest. I'm ready, she said. If you are. I didn't hesitate, took her hand, felt the warmth of her skin, the steady pulse. I've been ready, I said quietly. She rested her head on my shoulder, and we sat a long time, watching the sun dip lower over the lake. It wasn't a movie love story, no dazzle, no drama. It was slow, sometimes painful, but real. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. Over the next 6 months, we built something new. Not a replacement for what she'd lost, but something that honored it while moving forward. We fixed up her house together, took day trips, hiking trails, visiting small towns, getting lost on purpose to stay out longer. We laughed more. We kissed finally. A cautious, tentative kiss one night, under her porch light as I walked her home. Much later, we talked about the future, a life we could build together, not rushed or forced, just dreamed. Samantha reached for my hand, said, "I'm glad you stayed that night." I squeezed her hand gently. Me too. We didn't need to say more. In the end, it wasn't about saving each other. It was about finding the strength to keep living and choosing to do it together, not because we were broken, but because we'd found something worth rebuilding. 2 people, 2 pasts, 1 future. The storm had passed, the house felt warm again, and for the first time in a long time, Samantha and I weren't just surviving, we were living.